Thank you for joining. My name is Erin Mullen. For those of you who don't know me, I am the chair of Young Guns for 2020, and I'm excited to have everyone on the virtual call with me today, and especially excited to have Kelvin Walker, CEO of Dallas Citizens Council, as our guest. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We have placed all participants on mute for the duration of the moderated conversation. After the moderated conversation, we'll open up to questions from the audience. If you all could go ahead and submit those questions to Kristen Orias via the chat function at any time during the discussion. And then at the conclusion of the event, please stay for virtual networking and everyone will be placed in a breakout room. And all of those aside, with that, today it's my pleasure to introduce Kelvin Walker. In March of 2019, Kelvin assumed the role as CEO of Dallas Citizens Council. Prior to that, he was managing director of RLJ Equity Partners, a private equity arm of Robert L. Johnson's business empire here in Dallas. Kelvin has long been active in Dallas's business and civic circles, serving on the boards of Methodist Health Systems and the YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas. We are excited to have him here today to discuss leadership, collaboration, and both of those things, especially during these uncertain times. Thank you and welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you, Erin. Happy to be here.
So I figured we'd start with a little bit of background. I know Dallas Citizens Council was founded in 1937 and has a long legacy of providing strategic vision for Dallas. However, in case a few of our participants aren't familiar with the organization, can you give us a brief overview of how DCC serves the community?
Sure. Thank you for having me again. And the Citizens Council was started 83 years ago by a group of CEOs and businessmen focused on creating more civic engagement for business leaders in Dallas, as well as solving problems that they believe that a small group of business leaders could do. If you look at the names of any of the highways in Dallas, they're Robert B. Cullum or any of the other ones, you'll notice that those were all some of the original leaders who formed the Citizens Council long ago. We want to be, in today's world, very proactive about how we engage as leaders to solve problems and create the pathway for more inclusive growth through our 150 members, most of whom are CEOs of the largest companies. We focus primarily on 4 areas: education, mobility, housing, and overall quality of life. And our work is expressed through our advocacy, both with our elected leaders and other leaders in our both not-for-profit and our appointed government leaders. Most of the CEOs in Dallas would be people that you would know who are members of the Citizens Council, with an eye toward focusing on making sure that the core of Dallas continues to be the heartbeat of the metro area.
And specifically on kind of the 4 areas where you guys focus, can you tell us a little bit more on how you, what you're doing in those specific areas?
Sure.
I know it's
Sure.
infrastructure improvements, education, affordable housing, and transportation. So we'd love some insight there.
Sure. I'd say first, I probably have to bifurcate it in both pre-COVID-19 and beyond. When we started this year, we thought this would be a year to focus very heavily on workforce development as an infrastructure investment. When you look at what has happened in the miracle of the growth of North Texas over the last 10 to 15 years, we've had tons of people move here, tons of new jobs. Most people moving here were moving here for a job, but there's been a large swath of our population in our workforce that have been, I won't say systematically, but certainly left out of the growth and prosperity that we've experienced in Dallas. And by investing more heavily in workforce by partnering with the community college district, as well as UNT Dallas and the entirety of DISD, in an effort to, of course, selfishly deliver even more qualified workers for the companies that are here in Dallas, we believe that there needed to be more focus by the business community to be in partnership with all of our educational leadership. So this year, I've joined the board of Commit as an example. And also we've gotten a lot more of our companies involved with all of the DISD programs that are focused on the career institutes and the PTEC programs, which begin to deliver more of a technology experiential learning process to all of our, to 27 of our DISD high schools. So that'd be one area. With respect to housing, housing is our newest area of focus. As we look at the growth in Dallas, one of the key tenets of our growth has been quality of life and housing. So if you think about companies competing to thinking of moving here versus California or New Jersey or New York, the cost of housing here is so much less historically that has been one of the big tipping points that would allow companies to consider moving here. As prices have increased and as we've had several significant areas where we haven't seen the housing growth, we are a little less competitive there. And as a result, we've partnered with both SMU and the Bush Institute to begin to dig more deeply into how we, from a housing policy standpoint, and how we can partner with organizations like TREC and others to make sure we're providing housing for our first responders, school teachers, and others who need an entry-level product in the city that doesn't necessarily push them out into the suburbs.
Awesome. And a little bit, about your background. I know you left investment banking and that world to lead a nonprofit organization.
Mm-hmm.
You've now been CEO for about a year. What have you learned about that role, the organization, the city?
Sure. It's, well, first, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I began to think about how can I do more in Dallas, one, and two, how can I do more without getting on planes as a career? The last 20 years of my career in private equity, I traveled, at least a week and a half to 2 weeks per month. I have middle school age children here at home. I guess we're all at home now. A lot of online school going on. So I started to look around and think about opportunities. And as I was doing that, literally on a 6 a.m. flight to DC, the home office of my former firm, I struck up a conversation, I guess would have been a couple of years ago now, with Matrice Kirk, the person who was doing the search for the new CEO for the Citizens Council. And we just struck up a conversation. I've known her a long time, and once the search happened, she contacted me, and I was one of the candidates to get to be considered, and ultimately got the job. Not at all what I would have thought I'd be doing. And when I think of what I do now versus then, for those of you who are in real estate or any of the financial services, the way you describe having a good day or keep score is fairly discrete and quantitative. A whole lot less quantitative day to day in this role. And what I've learned is that there's so many great things that go on in Dallas that are harder to measure. The quality of our leadership on the elected level, the quality of our business leadership, the quality of our leadership of our trade associations, the work we all do together. You don't necessarily have a scorecard every day to say, well, I invested money here and the returns are X. It's more of a constant movement to know that you're bettering the overall quality of life. So it's been a very incredible mind shift for me to think about what constitutes success, but a welcome one, and one that I will say either as a short stint or as something to do for a career. I'd encourage any of you on the call to think about it at least some point in your life, because it can be very impactful.
What has been probably the most eye-opening thing you've learned about Dallas as a whole?
Well, the connectedness of our leadership across all sectors has been very gratifying to know and to find out. And that is from, the organizations like TREC to the city of Dallas, to Dallas County, to our business leadership, and even our philanthropic community. There are threads that connect all of what we do. And I think it's expressing itself particularly now during this during this crisis. If you look at how quickly organizations have stepped up many times in concert with others to solve problems, be it the things for basic needs like food, or more specific, needs like testing or equipment for testing, PPE. It's been amazing to see how this community works together. So that was something I knew from afar from my civic work, Methodist Hospital or with the YMCA, but to see it more specifically in this role has been very gratifying.
Was there anything that surprised you?
I think I was a little surprised at how much, as things occur, how much we get inbound calls to the Citizens Council, either for help or perspective. I was not on the board or a member of the Citizens Council. My former partner, John Ware, who was a former city manager of Dallas years ago, was a member for years of the Citizens Council. So I was aware of it, but I was not aware of the reach and how often we get calls, either just for our opinion or to help with issues that may be business oriented or otherwise.
Interesting. And you were talking about how it's so different, quantifying things and your historical roles and your roles now. Are there any similarities between those two worlds that you've seen cross over?
Yeah, I think that the big thing, and I remember my very first day, March 25th, had a first day on the job, 7:30 a.m. executive committee call. And I got to the office probably about 7 a.m. and sort of sat in the office. And at first I thought, well, what have I gotten myself into? So very different from anything I had done before. But it's all about, when I think of the things we did in private equity, while you do all of the financial metrics, you do all of the financial modeling, you spend a lot of time looking at the company, the strategy, the industry. At the end of the day, it always came down to people. It always came down to, do I trust these people? Are these people I believe can deliver? Are these people I can work with? I think that the common thread between the two jobs has been working with people and being able to evaluate those who how you work with people and how you're able to come together for a common objective. So that part of it, very similar. A lot of the things I did in private equity in terms of being on boards to really push management to do things, I'm now sort of seeing that in reverse. Now, I'm listening to my board and they're pushing me to make sure we deliver on all the objectives year after year.
And while you serve in obviously a more formal role now, it sounds like you've been very involved in other community and civic work, prior in your old role. Where does that interest come from? Have you always had a level of involvement?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Griffin, Georgia, small town, and my parents were both educators, principal and school counselor. And they were very involved civically. My dad was on the board of the Girl Scouts. He's on the board of the local hospital. And so giving back was always something that we were encouraged to do. My sister and I were encouraged to do. And so when I moved here, in the first 3 or 4 years of being here, probably 99 to 02, because I traveled so much, I was not involved at all, but ultimately got involved with the Y and then Methodist Health System. So I think it creates the balance. And frankly, from a professional development standpoint, there are a lot of opportunities ways of growing yourself by being involved in civic activities, from the work you do with the board, from the additional responsibilities you may get civically that may be out of the realm of your normal professional duties at your job. So it can be a great way to even professionally round out all your skills.
And from Georgia, give us a gauge on what your timeline looked like after that. Did you leave Georgia for college? What other cities have you been in?
Oh, sure. So, God, it seemed long ago, back in the 80s. I graduated from business school in '86. I went to the Kellogg School at Northwestern, undergraduate degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta, and I worked in Atlanta and Charlotte on 2 separate tours with the old Bank of America system. And then I went into investment banking with a firm out of Chicago, Mesero Financial. I worked both in the structured finance group in the mortgage finance group for about 4 years, and called on financial institutions and some private equity funds toward the end of that stint, and then moved to Dallas in January of '99 to join one of the then Hicks Muse partnerships that was started to invest in small to mid-sized companies. So I've been here 21 years.
And you had said you'd been traveling a lot to DC?
Last 3 years of my job to DC, RLJ Equity Partners, the second firm that I worked with, was headquartered in DC. And so even though we invested nationwide, all my partners were in DC. So I was there at least 3 times a month, in addition to other travel to source opportunities.
So between Atlanta, Charlotte, Chicago, DC, you have a variety of experience. What sets Dallas apart from those cities or others and really makes us special?
Dallas, and I say this a lot, and I say that in a good way, Dallas has an ego. Dallas, it is not your typical, what I'd say, southern city. Dallas is a very much a can-do city. I remember the first week I was here for work in '99, and I was at a breakfast, and I recall two different waiters. I can't remember the restaurant. 2 different waiters were talking to their customers about a deal that they had. I mean, and I was like, wow, this is just very different than Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta is a very vibrant city, but I just didn't notice that personality about Atlanta or Charlotte. And so I think, and it's also a city that on the surface, Dallas may not be a city that people come here and think it's immediately welcoming, but I think it is. I think it's a city that if you're here to work and you have an interesting opportunity or an idea, you can easily get traction with it, to the extent it makes sense. So I do think sort of the can-do nature and a little bit of the ego, I won't say swagger like the old show Dallas, but I mean literally, the pride that people have in living here and living in the region, that is palpable, and I think people feel it when they come here to visit.
Yeah, I can, as someone who was born and raised in Dallas, and I can attest to the ego, but we'll call it pride.
Sure, no, and I mean it in a good way. I don't mean we're egomaniacs, but I mean I think Dallasites and people who live here love the city. It sort of permeates all the culture from sports, and you see it ruminates in the business world as well.
Definitely. So shifting gears a little bit to talk, about COVID and crises, since we haven't talked about it enough in our normal day-to-day life. This isn't the first crisis that DCC has faced in its 80 plus year history. What insight, has the organization gained from other challenges in the past?
I think the first is to be connected and collaborate. If you recall, about 3 years ago, it was the beginning of some of the issues with the Dallas Fire and Police pension plan. And I think the initial instincts of the organization were probably just to get 4 or 5 CEOs together and go meet with the mayor and or meet with, the legislators to think about what needed to be done from a financing standpoint to make sure that there's continued liquidity to pay the pensioners, and also make sure the pensioners, the pension fund would be attractive to new employees. But instead, the Citizens Council partnered with both the chamber as well as other organizations, so you had more of a connected and fully a full business voice as we walk through those challenges. And having done that during that time period really informed the way we thought about how we've responded to COVID. Once, I guess on March the 8th or 9th, I got a phone call when I was at lunch from Judge Jenkins, and he had Dale Petrosky and Craig Davis from the chamber and Craig Davis from Visit Dallas on the phone. And he was letting us know that there had been the first of the community spread and what should we do. And from that call, that created several things that had our organizations and others collaborating from the very beginning before the first stay-at-home order. The first of which became the job exchange that you see, or the information you see on the Say Yes to Dallas website from the chamber. That was really born out of a very early conversation of our three organizations. And from there, weekly calls with a big group of us. Dale Petrosky and I have a call every morning since the stay-at-home order started at 7:30 a.m. to really plan our day around what do we respond to, and who's doing what, and where's the business community voice needed. So I think from the pension crisis, for sure, we learned to be more collaborative, to have a more fulsome voice for the entirety of the business community, and to include many others from the Dallas Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, Asian Chamber of Texas, many other organizations, so that it's not just government or anyone else hearing from the largest of the businesses in town. So it's a more inclusive voice.
And DCC is made up of 150 of Dallas's leading CEOs. I mean, during the crisis, how have those businesses come together? And have you heard any, interesting stories about how those companies are helping to fight against Corona?
Sure. I'll give you a few examples. Quickly, as we got through the first week of the stay-at-home order, or as the stay-at-home order was starting, that coincided with the beginning of DISD spring break. And, so DISD sends all the children home with laptops. Well, at least a third of the DISD footprint has ineffective to no real broadband connectivity, whether you can afford to pay for it or not. Then, of course, a fair amount of students who parents would not be able to afford to pay for it. So quickly, AT&T jumped right in, one of our members with all of the hotspots, coordinated with DISD. So we were very gratified to see that. On a national level, Jacobs Engineering quickly got involved with several cities and offered their help here as well to stand up temporary hospitals and convention centers around the country. Given their work in sort of construction and infrastructure, they were able to spring into place many places, both in the U.S. and around the globe, actually, to help stand up facilities very quickly where there were significant outbreaks. Another example will be Haynes and Boone. I think for a couple of the food banks, giving pro bono services both to the organization and to any of the clients who came in who needed help from rent relief, particularly as we were trying to navigating through what would be the executive orders extended by the judge or by the governor. So a lot of our members have hopped into to action, and then more, I guess, in a bigger way now with the county judges' economic recovery task force. There's several members of our of the Citizens Council involved in the economic recovery process, and the policy subcommittee, as well as work and safety standards and other committees.
And you mentioned, executive mandates. Now that the governor has allowed for reopening of key businesses throughout the state, what does, quote, getting back to work look like, and what do you think will change and what will remain the same?
I think as I thought about that question, remote, the reality of being remote, I think is permanent in some cases. I mean, think about my kids at home. I think some of what they'll learn now will be remote learning or online learning. I'm sure that will be infused in the curriculum in some way, partly as a defensive measure in case we have other points in time where we have stay-at-home orders until there's a vaccine. I think also the way we all work. I think if you had told me on March the 17th or 18th that I would still be home in May and be perhaps working harder or at least as equally efficient, I wouldn't have believed it. So I think the remote part of working at home is kind of a permanent thing in our lives. I don't see us all getting back to work the same way. I think there'll be some parts of the population who just don't, for all sorts of reasons. It might be they're more comfortable and more efficient at home. They might be they believe they have some underlying conditions that would suggest they should wait a while before they come back to work. but I think that's a permanent part of how we will work. And I think we'll also, I think even though we may be in physical proximity by going back to the offices together, I think there'll be a whole lot more meetings where you would have gotten in your car to go talk to two people at your client's office, or if you're the client, instead of them coming to you or you going to them, you may all just hop on a Zoom call. I think this has become a little more accepted way to have some level of connection beyond a phone call.
Definitely. Sounds like you have had some success working from home. As you mentioned, you've been at least as productive, if not more. Do you have any tips?
Well, if you have children at home, the first thing is, put them on a routine. We have a board where I try to get them up at the same time as if they're going to school. I can tell you that isn't working, but I tell my friends it is, but it's really not. But the key for me is that I'm keeping my same routine. I get up about the same time I would get up to go prepare to leave the house for work and drop off my daughter. And my day starts a little bit early because I don't have the commute in to park and get to my office. But the thing I learned just 2 weeks ago, I had a day where I had a call. My calendar was blocked from 7:30 to 6. I mean, literally no, and there were almost all of them were Zoom calls. So I couldn't, be on the call and walk downstairs and get something out of the refrigerator or even have lunch. And so I've learned, take breaks, have at least 2 or 3 times a day that you've got 15 to 30-minute buffers between any of these calls that you have. If you can, take one of these calls outside or take one of the calls from a different room than your office or whatever room you use. And the biggest one for me is put some time on your calendar consistently to think. We're so busy thinking about work being an activity all the time. I think I've had more time to really think and really plan what I need to do next. When I'm in the office, I think I always had the fear of, there are all these things on my desk, let me grab one and keep going. I'm trying to learn to just have time where if there's nothing going on, I don't answer the phone unless it's urgent, and just think about either what I have done or what else needs to be done. And that's it. Those are the ones that I for sure I'd say don't stay in your office or wherever you work too long. It's so easy. I think when I worked in my office, I used to get up all the time when I was on conference calls and walk around and talk on the speakerphone. So often now I'm just sitting here hour after hour, and I've just learned I've got to get up and be a little more active.
I think those are all great. And while you're giving advice, let's keep it rolling. The group that you're talking to today or might listen to this recording is comprised of young professionals under the age of 35. And as a leader in your organization and within the city, what advice do you have to offer them both personally and professionally to help weather this storm? We've got people who've been furloughed, people who are, even more busy, less busy, scared. For a lot of us, it's kind of the first recession we will live through in our professional lives. So would love any advice that you have.
I will say for this to be your first recession, you're in an area that nobody has ever seen before, unless you're 103 years old, I guess, from the Spanish flu. First, I'd say, obviously, recessions are scary. If you have a job, you still think, wow, will I be next? Or what will it be like on the other side of this? I think, find a way, and I'm doing this myself, find a way to focus on one thing that you want to improve, whether it's taking one of the free online classes that so many schools are offering or some certification, whether it's in your industry or not. Use this time to say, I'm going to do something better or different about the skills that I have to improve them. That would be the kind of the first big thing. And then I would also say this is an extraordinary time, unlike any other recession where we've all been sent home, is that think about what you were doing before all of this, and are you doing what you think you really love? Because as I've gone through the journey of this year, I realized, I said, wow, I probably should have been doing something like this 7 or 8 years ago. As much fun as private equity was, and sort of a cool career, it's great cocktail chatter, and people hear you work in private equity. I've had more fulfillment in this job in the last, 13 months than a lot of the time I worked in private equity, although I enjoyed it. And I think in some ways, my skills were more stilted to, and personality more tilted toward this kind of work in the first place, which to me kind of explains why I love working with the management team so much, why I loved, sort of all the stuff that happened after we closed the transactions, so much of the personal interface. So if you've got to take the time every day to say, do I love what I do? Pre-COVID, if you were loving it, great. If you weren't, think about what you would change about it, and then start setting a path to do that. And then lastly, if you're furloughed, or if you think that you want to make changes in your career, although the good news is everybody is pretty much available, and it's pretty easy to reach people now. It'll be harder once we all go back to work. So virtually anybody you want to have a virtual cup of coffee with, or a Zoom meeting with, to get to know them, whether they'll admit it or not, they've got the time because they're sitting at home, and now is a great time to reach out and talk to them.
Awesome. And on that note, I will turn it over to Kristen to let some other people ask questions that they might have for you.
Yeah, so we have gotten a few questions from the audience. So there's some really great ones. I'll jump in. You mentioned a couple in a couple of your responses. You touched on education, and one of the questions was, what do you see as one of the key things to ensuring that every student does have a quality education? I know you mentioned there's a number of students who, the school sent home a device, but they didn't have a way to connect.
Right.
And kind of partnering with that, how long do you think it would take us as a city to get to that point? And, especially in this, now we are approaching summer, but depending on what things look like in the fall, if students are able to go back to school or not, how do you think that would play in, and how can people better support the school campus?
Sure. That's a great question. And I don't know if any of you saw Dr. Hinojosa's press conference yesterday. I want to say it's called Operation Connectivity. I'll get you the name. I can even forward you the deck. He has, and we're supportive of it. If it's called Operation Connectivity, it's the idea of getting our city way more connected than it is today. I think we didn't know, while people knew there were places where broadband wasn't available, and we had people who couldn't afford it. The gap that it's providing educationally today is becoming more obvious, and even for those folks who are having to work from home, but they're not able to get quality broadband because of the infrastructure. So there's a big move. There will be a big move afoot that business will have to support, and I think it's a business issue. So, and we are supportive of it. Not sure what it will cost, but it'll take philanthropy, business community, and the public sector to work on it together. And because I think if we don't do that, that's just a glaring hole in what could make Dallas a greater city. We could be potentially leaving out the next person to create the next Amazon or whatever because they don't have the connectivity. So that's what we're supporting. I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, make sure you can repeat it back, and I don't want to miss anything there.
Yeah, no, I think that was great.
Okay.
Kind of along those same lines, what are some of the other key issues or topics that the DCC is prioritizing on moving forward, that may be unique from other Dallas organizations' priorities?
Well, you'll see from us, we're advocating now and beginning at the very beginning stages of the mayor's economic recovery task force. One of the things we see, because of what we've experienced with COVID-19 is that we're going to have a very large support system for small to mid-sized businesses. They employ about 300,000 people in Dallas County. Small to mid-sized companies are the most at risk in this, during this pandemic. And not just with, the PPP loan or with, any money that the city can give them. There has to be a longer term, systematic approach to making sure we support our small to mid-sized businesses because they employ such a large swath of the citizenry. So that's something we're advocating for now and just beginning to. We had a conversation with the editorial board about this last week. And so in the work that the city's economic recovery task force will do, we'll be supportive of their work around that. So I think that'll be a critical piece to bring in the entirety of the economy back. I think most of our large companies will ultimately, be fine. Obviously retail is the one that's biggest at risk in terms of our larger retailers, but the AT&Ts and Toyotas of the world, they have enough scale that they'll be fine. But many of our small to mid-sized companies that are in their supply chains are struggling, and we've got to be a lot more forthright in our efforts to help them.
Wow. Well, looks like we have time for about one more question. So we did get a number in, and I'm sorry for those of you that were not able to get to your question, but I'll give the last one, and we'll go from there. So how do you, as a CEO of an organization representing 150 CEOs, manage what I'm sure are many different points of view on all kinds of issues? What strategies do you use to be single voice and avoid getting bogged down in a disagreement and diverse perspectives?
How do you manage 150 CEOs delicately? There's a little bit of everything you can imagine: collaboration, ego management. You gotta, spend first of all, you gotta develop the relationships. So for me, I knew 2/3 of the members already. I tried to get to know the other third, and but now knowing them in a different way because I'm a staff person, not one of their former board members on other organizations. But a lot of it, getting them to work together. We cast a common vision based on the discussions we have. And it's a lot of both one-on-one time with them, but also together, allowing everyone to have that voice to share their view and opinion. And then from there, reach some level of consensus. Every member of our organization is used to being in charge and leading organizations. So it's hard for them sometimes to step back and just be a member on a committee or a board, on the board. But it worked pretty well because I think everyone sees it as a common vision to help make Dallas a better place to live, work, and play. It's taken a lot of getting used to. I'm used to being in an environment where I'm collaborating with my partners and I'm getting the rest of the staff to execute. And now I realize, in some ways the roles are reversed. So it's taken a little bit of getting used to, but it's been fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Aaron, did you want to say anything to wrap up?
Sure. If I can be helpful to any of you, I'm sure one of you, feel free to share my contact information with everybody. If you have a question about, I'm certainly no expert on real estate, but just career development, or I think as leaders, we have to be open to talking to the next generation of leaders. So any of you who want to chat or shoot me an email, we'll figure out a time to catch up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm surprised that my kids stayed quiet the whole time, so it's all good.
That's impressive. Well, I just wanted to say thank you. I know that's all the time we have, but we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and being part of our virtual panel discussion. For everyone on the line, As I mentioned earlier, stay on the line for virtual networking, and we will have you guys placed into a breakout room. As a discussion starter, your group can start with one of these questions. What were your key takeaways on leadership from our discussion today? And what has your work from home experience been like? And what are your pro tips and tricks? So everyone enjoy, and Kelvin, thank you again.
Thank you so much. You guys have a good day.
You as well.